Perfect. We're done with our stars component. And now we want to complete my single product by setting up the add to cart component. Now, I have to be honest with you. Normally, when we're talking about add to cart, it is simply some kind of function that is in the cart context or in global context that just does the functionality where we just add component or I'm sorry, add a product to a cart. Now, in this case, we have a separate component and then there's going to be even more components. Why? Well, because we have more functionality. So if we take a look at the proper add to cart, you'll see that we'll be able to pick which color we would want as well as the amount, and I would want to control so the amount doesn't go more than the stock. So then this value is not more than how many items we have in stock. That's why we'll be setting up a separate component. And like I said, there's going to be more functionality in there. So normally it's just a function that adds the item to the cart and we're in good shape. In this case, we do have more functionality. That's why we're setting up separate component. And I'm going to navigate back to my single product page. Again, let's go over the logic. So I only want to display my add to cart component if the items in the stock are bigger than 0. So if I have some items to sell, then I would want to display the cart. If not, then of course I'm not going to display it. That's why I'm checking if the stock is bigger than 0. And then if that is the case, I'm adding the add to cart component to my UI. Now, what is missing in the add to cart, I would want to pass in the whole product. So I'm not going to pass property by property. I'm just going to grab the whole thing. So all the properties and pass it in as a prop. So in here, I'll write product is equal to a product. We'll save it. And you can probably already guess that we'll have to navigate to that component. So in here, in the add to cart component, first let's take a look at the imports. So we start with React. We have use state because there's going to be some local state. Of course, we have styled since we will style this component as well. We have a link because once we click on add to cart, I would want to navigate to the cart page. And you can double check that, of course, in the complete application, which is going to be over here. Notice once you click add to cart, you also navigate to the cart page. That's why we have a component. We have this little icon, FA check, because as we're clicking on the colors, and of course, I had to open up the one that doesn't have add to cart option. And notice every color is going to have this FA check icon. I mean, the one that has been clicked on, of course. And then we have this use cart context, which of course we'll set up later. But this is where the add to cart function is going to be coming from. Again, at the moment, we don't have it, but eventually we are going to get it from use cart context. And then we have amount buttons because when it comes to these buttons, I also set them up in a separate component because I just thought that there's too much stuff already in the add to cart component. And I'm going to start by destructuring 3 things out of the product. I would want to get the ID, I would want to get the stock, and I would want to get the colors. So in here, I'm going to go with ID, stock, and then of course, comma, colors. And all of that is coming from the product that we're going to destructure in the parameters. So that's the product that we are passing in. And there's going to be 2 state values, one for the amount. So as we're controlling the amount, of course, there's going to be 1 state value. And there's also going to be 1 for the colors because we need to understand that. Again, let me get the one that has maybe multiple colors. Hopefully I'll be able to find it. And of course, again, I get the one that doesn't. And this one still doesn't. Okay. Let's see, maybe this guy. And there it is. Now we have 2 colors. So I would want to display, of course, the first color by default. So in this case, of course, it is green. That's why we'll set up those state values. So in here, let's go with const and then main color and then comma set main color. And by default, the main color will be the first item in my colors array. Remember, colors was an array, correct? So we go here with colors and then 0, and that's going to be my initial value. Then there's going to be 2 functions, increase and decrease, that we're going to set up a bit later. In this video, I would want to focus on the colors first, and then we'll deal with amount. So let's go here with a wrapper. And inside of this wrapper, there's going to be two divs. There's going to be button container and then the colors. And also inside of the button container, we will set up our add to cart icon. But at the moment, we're not going to worry about it. Let's just start with a colors. Let's say that inside of the wrapper, we go with a div with a class of colors. And also, like I said, side by side, there's going to be a div with a class of btn container. So btn container. So we'll work on this return a little bit later. Let's just start with a colors. And inside of the colors, I would want to go with the span. We'll say some kind of text. In my case, it's going to be colors. And then let's set up a div side by side. And now what I would want is similar to like we did in the images. I just want to iterate over my colors. And then once I click on a color, I would set my state value equal to that color. Again, something we have already done quite a few times as far as the logic. So in here, let's go with colors. We're mapping over. And for the time being, let's not add any functionality. Let's just display those colors over here. So I'll say color. That's how I'm going to name my individual color. And I also would want to get the index. And as far as the return, well, I'm going to return a button. Since once I click on a button, I would want to change that state value. I'll set my key equal to the index, like so. And then I do need to add a class name as well as the style. So for the time being, we won't return anything in the button, although eventually there's going to be more function. And if we save, the moment we won't have anything, right? So we have only the colors, which of course is the span, and then we have the div, since we're not returning anything. Now, if you want, you can maybe return an index if you want to see whether everything works, and that should return 0 and 1, because in this case, I have two colors. Okay, awesome. So that looks good. I can see that I have two colors in this case. And now, of course, we just need to add a bit more logic. Now, if you remember, when it comes to colors, it was an array with values, right? The hex values. If you want, you can console log it. We're going to go with colors. And in the console, we should see that array. So let's take a look. We have console and we have array of colors. And notice how these are hex values. So what I would want to do right now is to add a class to my button. So there's going to be some styling. And if you scroll down, the class name is color btn, but all of them will have the same background. And that is going to be the black color. So of course, I would want to add that background dynamically. And I know that this background is coming from my array, from my colors array. So how we can set this up? Well, somewhat easy. What I could do is just say that, yep, there's going to be a class name, and eventually we'll make this dynamic, don't worry. But for the time being, let's just add this manually, and let's say color and then hyphen btn. So eventually we'll check for the active button. We're not doing that right now. And as far as the style, since all of them will be black, notice all of them will be just black because that's the color that I set up. Now what I would want is to add the background dynamically that is equal to the actual color, since I'm getting those hex values. And we can simply do that by setting up the style. So we're doing the inline style, and we're going to go to background, and background is equal to whatever color we're passing. And you'll notice that now, of course, I have both of the colors. In this case, that is red and green. So that should be the initial setup. Now, of course, once I click on a button, I would want to change my state value for two reasons. First, and by the way, let me get rid of the console log. Hopefully that is clear. And for two reasons, I would want to change the main color first, because this is going to be the value that I pass into the cart. Because again, if we take a look at the complete project, you'll notice that whichever color I pick is also going to be displayed in my cart. That's the reason why we're setting up this whole thing. And then the second thing, depending on this value, whatever it is, the main color value, I would also want to change the opacity, because if we again scroll down, notice here how by default, all the colors here have the opacity of button. So all the buttons, have 0.5. So all the buttons have the opacity of 0.5, and only the active one has the opacity of 1. So let's start by setting up the functionality where once we click on a button, I'm changing the state value of the main color. And we just go with on click. And then, of course, we'll pass in our arrow function. And here, let's go with set main color. And we'll just pass in the color. So by default, I'm getting the first one. But then once I click on specific color, of course, I change the value in my state. Hopefully that is clear. And by the way, you know what? I'll change this one to a lowercase. I think that's going to make a little bit more sense. So now, of course, we're changing the state value. And then depending on that state value, I would want to display two things. First of all, I would want to display the check icon inside of the button. So that just signals which item I have selected. And then the second one, I would want to add dynamically that class of active. So notice, again, by default, all the buttons have 0.5 opacity, but then the active one is going to have the opacity of 1. So it's going to be more visible. That's why here where we have a class name, now, of course, I'll set up the dynamic approach where there's going to be an expression. I'm going to go back to template literals and I'm going to set up my ternary operator. And I'm going to say if main color is equal to the color, that means that, of course, that is the main color in the state, correct? And if that is the case, well, not only I'm going to add the color btn, I'll also add a class of active. Again, something we have already done during the course. And if it's not the case, then of course it's just going to have this color button class. And then the second place where I'm going to be checking whether the main color matches the color, meaning every color in my array, that is of course inside of the button, where I'm going to say if main color, so pretty much the same thing, the same ternary operator, only the result is going to be a little bit different. If the main color is equal to color, then return a check icon, like so. That means that that is the main color in my state. And if it doesn't match, then just return a null. And what you'll notice right now is that once I click on a button, notice how this one gets back the opacity of 0.5, and this one gets the class of active. So there's opacity of 1 as well as the check icon. And again, the reason why we're doing that, because we will pass this value into the cart. So in a cart, I also would want to display which color I'm getting for the specific product.